for having me here today. Just wanted to, like I said, I'm Jamie Clancy. I'm a member of the Culpeper Town Council, among various other things here in the community, specifically Culpeper Youth, and I want to give a shout out to Josh, who's our VP. He's right there. He's our amazing new VP. And I want to thank everyone for coming here today, this afternoon, on Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all you moms and you mother figures out there. Thanks to Abigail and Dan for being here today and for participating. So today is a joint venture between the Culpeper Persisters and the Culpeper County Democratic Committee. And we want to thank you guys for putting this forum on because it is very important for people to be aware of the issues and know and exercise their right to vote. It's very important to know how decisions made at a government level trickle down and impact people on a day-to-day. So we are all in charge of exercising our right to vote and making sure that we put the people into office that we want to be there. And I would like to give up the floor now to Donna DeAngelis. She's going to tell you about how the rules of today are going to work. Come on up, Donna.
Thank you, Jamie. I have a reputation of being a tough taskmaster, so I was asked to do the rules of the road here. Each candidate will get 5 minutes to give an opening address. After that, there will be a series of questions, and each candidate will get 3 minutes to answer each question, and the candidates will alternate who goes first. At the end, the candidates will have 4 minutes each to give a closing statement. All of the questions were submitted in advance so that both organizations requested questions so that we will not be taking them from the audience. However, after we end this afternoon, there will be plenty of time for meet and greet. So if you have a burning question you want to ask one of the candidates, that will be your opportunity to do so. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of the panel, who's very qualified and experienced, and the vice chairperson of the Culpeper County Democratic Committee, Tristan Shields.
Hey guys, how are you? How are you? Okay, that's much better. Are you guys ready to go? I'm not going to give a speech. I'm going to start asking questions. Well, actually, we're going to start with your introduction. So I'm going to let y'all introduce yourself. Let me just check to make sure that's what I'm supposed to do. Yes, that's what I'm supposed to do. So, all right. We're going to start with Abigail first, and then Dan second for the introductions, and then we'll start rotating back and forth for each question. I'll also say if you need the question repeated, that's totally fine. It won't count against your time or anything. Just ask me, and I will repeat the question. All right, so if we could start off. Abigail, you're first. He's got the time.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abigail Spanberger, and I'm running for the Democratic nomination here in the 7th District. And I am running for Congress because I believe that we need our elected leaders in Washington to be working day in and day out to make the lives of their constituents better. And we need people who are committed to deeply understanding the problems facing our communities. And we need people who are committed to working to remedy them and rectify them through positive legislation. And I grew up in the 7th District. I moved to Henrico County as a kid, and it's where I call home. I began a career in public service following in the footsteps of my father. I initially started as a federal agent. I worked narcotics and money laundering cases, and I was based in DC. And after a couple years, I moved to the CIA. And I worked undercover for the entirety of my time with the CIA. I worked cases as varied as counterterrorism, nuclear proliferation, Latin American drug trafficking cases, and Africa leadership issues. And at the core of what it is that I was doing is I was collecting the vital information that would have allowed our policymakers, our president, our diplomats, and our military to make the best and the most informed decisions possible about issues of national security. We were working to avoid and thwart terrorist threats, and we were working to inform those making decisions at negotiation tables around the world. And it was an incredible career. I was based in DC for a time, and then I was overseas and ultimately on the West Coast. And back in 2014, I was discussing with my youngest daughter where we might go next, and I said, maybe we'll go to Nairobi, Kenya, or should we bid on Berlin, Germany, or London? And my daughter said, well, what about Virginia? And I said, how about Berlin or Nairobi? And she said, but why wouldn't we go to Virginia? Everyone we love is in Virginia. And it was a moment for me because I had been so focused on the mission that I was serving, that I was working to uphold the Constitution, and I was working to uphold the oath that I had taken. But I realized that we weren't building a community for our kids. And I had grown up with a mother who was a nurse who would stay late with her patients because they needed her. And I grew up with a father who was heavily involved in our community. And I realized that my kids, that I wanted the same thing for them. So in 2014, we decided to move back to Virginia. I got my employment declassified, which was a 9-month-long process, and then I went to work in the private sector. I started a Girl Scout troop, and I began working as a consultant, working with universities on higher education recruiting and financial planning for students. And in 2016, on the day of the election, I was working at the polls. I was handing out sample ballots, and it was an exciting day, and there was this woman who walked in front of me. And she was dressed in head to toe in white, and she was proud, and she was probably in her late 70s. And I felt just this incredible excitement watching this woman, knowing exactly what it is that she was going to do. And then that night, when we watched the returns come in, I remember thinking about her, because as much as I felt incredible disappointment, I wondered what it was like for her, the woman who had dressed head to toe in white, what it was like for her to watch the polls that night. And so I got even more involved in politics. I had been, since returning back to Virginia, I'd been a volunteer with Moms Demand Action, an advocate. I'd been active with the Democratic Party. And in 2017, after working for the House of Delegates members all throughout their elections, I worked the polls again. And that day was an exciting day, because for every person who for that woman who had walked to the polls so proudly, there were 5 people who were walking to the polls with just a resolute stance. And I knew we were going to turn the tides in Virginia, that we were going to be the first ones leading this country and showing what is possible when we take our votes to the ballot box. And I decided to run for the seat on the day of the House healthcare vote last year, so just a little over a year ago, because I watched, as we all did, our congressperson take a vote that would have taken healthcare away from millions of Americans. And they did so. They held that vote without so much as a CBO score. And when I reflect on every risk I ever took as a CIA officer, every strange or uncomfortable or challenging situation I was in for the sole purpose of allowing someone else to make an informed decision, the fact that our members of Congress would not even wait for a CBO score showed a true abdication of the responsibility that they have to be leaders of this country. And that's what motivated me on that day to definitely run, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Dan Ward.
Hello. Hello, Culpeper. Good to see you guys again. My name's Dan Ward, and I've met most of y'all, but it's good to see new faces in here too. I live in Orange. I have a small farm down there, raise Hereford cattle. But I didn't always live in Orange. I was born in Alabama. I was number 3 of 3 boys. And my mom and dad, they divorced when I was really young. And my mom remarried a man with 4 boys. And so my mom, I wish she was here. She was going to be, but she had to get her glasses today. She found herself caring for 7 boys in a 2-room log cabin in southern Tennessee in a place called Hot Rock. And we raised tobacco, and we raised cattle, and we didn't even have running water the first year. But we didn't know what we didn't have, right? We were happy. And, by 1980, we had moved to Virginia, Madison County. I showed steers here in Culpeper at the CMR Farm Show. Got my first job here in Culpeper at the McDonald's, cleaning the grease out. So I'm pretty familiar with Culpeper. I earned a scholarship to college, but with that scholarship came a commitment to service. I had to go in the Marine Corps because the Marine Corps paid for my school. And while in the Marine Corps, I became an attack pilot. I flew in wars in Bosnia and Kosovo and Iraq. By 2008, I'd left active duty. I was in the reserves, and I was a new hire pilot at Continental Airlines. And in 2008, like many Americans, I lost my job. There were 750,000 people a month losing their job in this country that year. And it's particularly galling to me as we talk about Dave Brat, who is working tirelessly to unwind the regulations on Wall Street that caused that awful period in our history. At the same time, he's trying to take people's health care away. I was on unemployment, and we're having to make the decision, do we pay for our health care, or do we pay our mortgage? I was married, 2 kids, they were both young, and we chose to pay our mortgage. In 2009, we were out of money. I went back active duty in the Marine Corps, and it was a seminal moment for me in my life. It is a point where I always say, necessity is the mother of all invention. And I found myself working in Eastern Europe, mainly in Romania and Bulgaria and Ukraine. And because of that work, my follow-on and last assignment was in President Obama's State Department. I was a senior military advisor. I was a colonel working in the undersecretary's office in 2014 when the Russians invaded Ukraine, and my boss, the undersecretary, asked me to go help the embassy in Ukraine. One of the first names that came across us as we discussed what's happening was Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort at that time worked for Viktor Yanukovych. Viktor Yanukovych worked for Vladimir Putin 2 years before he became Donald Trump's campaign manager. I believe that our Constitution can handle a presidency like this one, but it requires that Congress not be complicit. This Congress is complicit, and Dave Brat is a yes man to Donald Trump. Folks, there is a huge difference between our friends and neighbors that are Republican and what's left of the Republican Party in Washington, D.C. Because what's left of that Republican Party is owned lock, stock, and barrel by Donald J. Trump. And let's not forget how he began his presidency. His political campaign was based on a racist lie that President Obama isn't even American. Folks, negotiating with the likes of Trump and Brat is like negotiating with a tiger with your head in its mouth. It's not possible, and it's time to stand up. I am really tired of the false equivalency and the both sides arguments. Because it's not the Democrats that equated Nazis and KKK members with those standing up to them in Charlottesville. And it's not the Democrats that deflect gun violence because they work for the NRA. And it's not the Democrats that conspired with our enemies to preserve power and corruption. If you don't understand that right now, you're missing what this moment's about. This moment's about standing up for this. There is a lot of right and wrong. I have been a fighter my whole life. I promise you I will fight for you, and I will fight to protect our democracy. My name is Dan Ward, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So a few little housekeeping things before we get started with the questions. One, for you guys, just so you know, there's a switch on that microphone, and if it says off, it don't work. So turn it on. Second thing is, we're all obviously very excited to be here. You want me to turn it down? How's that? Is that better? So we're all very excited to be here. I know most of you support one of these candidates, but we're not going to have any clapping or any sort of cheering after answers. And if you do, I got this thing here. I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to stop you. So there's going to be none of that. And also, I hate to have to say this, but everyone, please, right now, check your cell phones. Because your cell phones should be off. If someone's phone goes off in the middle of one of these questions, I am also going to hit this thing. It's going to mean something. So, if you guys are ready, we're going to get started. So you each have 3 minutes to answer the question. Ed is our timekeeper, as you saw before. We're going to start with Dan. That's all right with you? Okay, great. Okay, so wait, did I say 3 minutes or 2 minutes? 3 minutes, okay. So our first question is about healthcare. Healthcare in rural areas of the United States often lags far behind healthcare in urban areas. What should the federal government's role be in trying to provide more affordable and accessible quality healthcare in rural areas?
Sorry, folks, I'm going to stand up. I'm more of a hand talker, so you're going to have to deal with that. Healthcare in the rural areas, it's a great question, and it's something that affects us. You know, I live in a rural area, and if you notice, most of the hospital closings that are happening in the rural areas of this country, not just this district, are largely due to the lack of the failure to do the Medicaid expansion. Those states that expanded Medicaid, their hospitals are in much better shape. We Virginians have been paying into the system for 8 years and have not gotten any of the services out of it. It's time for us to pass that, and let's hope that they're going to do it this year. Hopefully we can start caring for our fellow citizens. On a bigger sense, though, listen, we've got to stop attacking our healthcare system. We've got to take the profits out of this. Right now, with the tax cut bill that happened, we removed the individual mandate. Our premiums are skyrocketing. They spent 8 years attacking and trying to bring down the Affordable Care Act. It's time to repeal that tax cut, put the individual mandate back into place. Let's start repairing the Affordable Care Act, and let's pass Senator Kane's Medicare X, which is a public option. It allows everybody to buy into the Medicare system. And it starts in the rural areas, to your point. And I think that this is a smart way, because let's be real. A lot of Republican support is here in the rural areas. And what I want to see happen is use Medicare X, have the rural people buy into this. A lot of Republicans, they understand that government health care isn't such a taboo thing. Let's not give the Republicans the space they need as we move towards a single payer, because the only way we're going to care for the people in this country with health care and also address our long-term budgetary issues is getting to a single payer system, getting the profit motive out of health care. I'm tired of talking about access to health care, folks. Let's talk about health care. There's a big difference. We need health care, and right now we're paying almost twice what anybody else in the world does for a product that isn't very good. And so it is time for us to come in to the 21st century. Let's address our budgetary issues, because if you're a fiscal conservative, you need to be looking at this. And then at the same time, this is a very moral way of doing it, because it allows people to actually have health care. Not access to health care, health care. And that's what I support, and I think that you'll find in the rural areas that's the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Oh, who did that? Who did that? What did I just say? You are not paying attention. All right, Abigail, thank you.
Yes, this is an excellent question, because everywhere I've traveled across the district, from Culpeper to Henrico to Chesterfield to Nottoway, healthcare is the number one thing that people are talking about. And it impacts everyone in this district in different ways in some cases, where in the rural areas where we see that there are fewer options, there are fewer healthcare providers, there are people who have to travel at least an hour to get to a hospital to see a provider. It creates impediments to people's ability to get care. But with all of the attacks that we have seen on the ACA, with the removal of the individual mandate that came with the tax bill, with the efforts to undermine the ACA, such as limiting advertising costs, such as changing and affecting the enrollment period, even when the enrollment period is right before the holidays in December. Everything that this current Congress has done, and the prior Congress before that, Republicans in Congress have worked to undermine the viability of the ACA, which means it has had negative impacts on the program, on the costs that people are paying, whether they're on the ACA or whether they're on employer-provided plans. And in fact, where I live in Henrico County, there's currently only one ACA provider, because even in heavily populated suburban areas, the ACA has created, is facing such trouble because of the fact that there is so much polarization and partisanship surrounding ensuring that people have health care. So I support, there's a bill before Congress put in by a Democrat and a doctor out of California. It's Pathway to Universal Health Care, and it would provide automatic enrollment access state by state to test out the process to put people into ACA. There's consumer protections involved, so people can opt out if they're not interested. He's also proposed another bill that would change the enrollment period to line up with tax season, so that when people are looking at what it is that they're doing with their financials, they can at that point in time see what subsidies exist and enroll in the ACA. I also support the Medicare X program, which is a plan that would build off of the network of providers that are currently involved in Medicare, and it would allow for people to have a public option which would mitigate and help with the risk pools. So when we look at the fact that in the 7th District, estimates are by 2025, the cost of insurance for an average family of 4 is going to go up over $2,000 per year. Ensuring that people have a public option will be one of the #1 ways that we can address those risk pools. And unlike the ACA, as it's written, Medicare X is implemented iteratively so that we can see what the implementation is like initially and adjust it if there are any issues so that the program, as it goes year to year for a 3-year full rollout, can actually be sustainable and ideally avoid a lot of the partisan bickering that has undermined what we see with the ACA. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Yep, if you really go over, you get that sound. That is not a good sound. All right, so this one, we're going to start with Abigail, and then we'll do Dan. We're actually going to do a question on agriculture, and then circle back to healthcare again, healthcare and our social safety net. So our agriculture and forestry are the single largest industries in the state of Virginia. What will you focus on in Congress to support farmers and related jobs? Abigail's up first.
You're going to hear me say this a lot, that the 7th District is such an amazing and diverse place because across the district we have such a diversity of industry. And agriculture, we have agricultural industries in the northern part of the district and the southern part of the district. And so for someone representing the 7th District, there is such an imperative that we really understand what it is that we can be doing to ensure that we are providing farmers and those involved in agricultural businesses the most advantages possible. Part of it, and I'll jump ahead, is ensuring that people have the ability to care for their most basic needs. So ensuring that people have health care coverage, ensuring that farmers aren't worried about paying their bills or paying for their prescription drugs. That's an important economic piece that is important to every person, in particular farmers. We need to make sure that we are also protecting our environment. When we are talking about individuals who rely on the security of our soil water and our rivers and our streams and ensuring that that what they are growing is not in any way being polluted by pollution, we need to make sure that we have strong regulations regarding what is flowing into our waterways and our tributaries. We also need to ensure that we are looking at our immigration issue because for so many people who are involved in agriculture, part of the issue, the complication that people are facing is when we see discussions related to immigration and limiting workforces that are really important, really providing really important workforce in a lot of our agricultural work. We need to ensure that we have a process by which people can be in this country legally and can continue contributing and using their skills. And much of that is done throughout agriculture work across the state of Virginia. We also need to have members of Congress who are willing to stand up to the president when he unilaterally puts tariffs in place that will significantly impact Virginians. When we look at the trade war that the president is starting related to soybeans, we are one of the top states impacted by those tariffs. Because Virginia and the amount of soybean production that we have, it is a vital part of our economy. And we need people in Congress who are willing to stand up and say, what you are doing is hurting the farmers in our district, it's hurting the industry in our district. And so it is incredibly important that we look at all of the interrelated aspects of what does impact agriculture in our state, and that we have members of Congress who are looking to stand up to the president when he's doing something to undermine their efforts, but then also legislate and create laws that will in fact encourage their ability and ensure a healthy workforce, ensure an availability of a workforce, and ensure that the ground that they're working with remains safe.
Thank you, Abigail. Dan.
So, I mean, right here in Culpeper, we're facing issues with agriculture. The corporate takeover in our agriculture is underway here. We need to start doing and having programs that encourage and help family-owned farms stay in business and stop this drift towards the corporatocracy of everything, including our agriculture. It is happening right here. To Abigail's point, it's true, the tariffs is absolutely going to devastate our ability if we start a trade war with the Chinese. So we need to have a more judicious approach to how we combat Chinese, issues with trade. Listen, they are not good actors, but we need to be smart about how we push back against them. And in Virginia, soybeans are a huge export, and it will affect us here in the district. The Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is the 800-pound gorilla in the agricultural world. There are good elements and there are bad elements. The natural resource and the conservation services is something that's good. We've reduced, by passing this and by funding this, we've reduced soil erosions by 60%. We need to start doing more, though, towards the nitrogens that are getting into our groundwater. particularly in the Midwest, but even here in Virginia. 76% of the Farm Bill goes to the SNAP program. I don't know if many people realize that. So that is a big part of the Farm Bill is the SNAP program and the subsidies that come with that. And lastly, on the Farm Bill, we need to start attacking and bringing down crop insurances, because crop insurance is what allows farmers to stabilize year to year so they can have a more predictive harvest, if you will, because one year could be good, one year could be bad. We don't need the roller coaster ride, and that's what crop insurance is supposed to do, and we've been letting that program get away from us for a long time, and that needs to be stabilized, particularly in the dairy industry. But yeah, those are all things that are important here that I support. As I mentioned, I raise beef cattle. This is something near to me. I don't have any dealings with the Farm Bill, but it's something that's important to me. And we need to start caring for that, because, the rural parts of this country right now, in my opinion, are being left behind in the 21st century economy. And we've got to start doing things that address that. And keeping our agricultural advantages is one of them. But we also need to start facing our educational issues and start bringing our education up to where it's on par with the Fairfax counties and the Henrico counties. And that's going to be funding, but I'm sure education question will be coming at some point.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
we got education. Don't worry about that. Thank you very much, Jan. Okay, so now we're going to move back to sort of social safety net program question, and Dan's going to start this one. You started last time, right, Abigail? Okay, cool. If I mess that up, tell me, because there's only two of you, so it gets confusing. All right, so this is relating back to healthcare. What specific measures should the federal government enact to ensure the promise of our safety net programs like Medicare and Social Security, I know a lot of people in here probably care about that, are guaranteed to future generations?
So Social Security and Medicare are the issues. And folks, you can bet your paycheck they're going to come after that next year. You can just bet it. It's going to happen. They passed that tax cut, $1.5 trillion, that when our tax cut expires in a few years, 83% of that money will be going to the top 1%. That's just the fact. And so now the deficits are too big, including Mr. Brat, who was probably the biggest cheerleader of this tax cut there was in Congress, and now he's yelping about deficits again. So how is that possible? The biggest driver of what you just passed that you're now complaining about. And so what they're going to do, they're going to start coming after those programs next year because the deficit's too big. And that's just going to happen. And I bet you're going to start seeing a move towards privatizing Social Security. That's what they're going to want to do. Folks, I fundamentally think that the Republican Party stands for taking public funding, giving it to the private sector so the private sector can turn around and fund their elections. That is the circle at its core, what they stand for. But government has a role in our society. Social Security, we have been paying into our whole lives. It's our money. And I tell you what, there are, as the wealth disparity in this country increases, more and more people are reliant on that Social Security check to survive. And what we don't need is to have the Republicans take that money, give it to some charlatan investor who's going to blow it and keep it. And that's, folks, that's what's going to happen. Medicare and healthcare, folks, I'm telling you, if we are at all interested in maintaining solvency in this country, we're going to have to get to single payer in this country. It is the only way we're going to do it. The unfunded medical liability of our government is not sustainable. It's just not. And so what we've got to do is we've got to start addressing, from a moral perspective, giving people health care, as well as a fiscal perspective of being responsible for maintaining our budget issues. It does both. When you start taking the profit motive out of healthcare, you start treating healthcare issues instead of trying to drive prices up to profiteer on it. And most of the world has already figured that out. Churchill once said, we exhaust every option before we get to the right answer, and maybe you're right on this one, but I think we got to move it in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Abigail.
When we look at the assaults on our programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, it is not the problems of those, it's not those programs that are in fact the problem. Back in 2009, there was a CBO report that said, estimated that the spending on those would be $2.9 trillion in 2019. Now they've readjusted it to $2.7 trillion. So those numbers are going down, but what they built those estimates off of back in 2009, they estimated that our revenues in 2019 would be $4.5 trillion. And now, because of the tax bill that was passed last year, it's estimated to be $3.5 trillion. So this is not a problem where our mandatory spending programs, where our social safety net programs are the problem. It's an issue that there is not enough money going into it, and we cut revenues at a point when we were pulling ourselves out of a recession. If we want to ensure that our pay-as-you-go program like Social Security has the funding that it needs, we need more people paying into it. And one of the drivers, one of the things we could do to ensure that our Social Security program is getting Social Security dollars into it is to ensure that we have more people working legally, paying taxes, paying into the Social Security program. And a lot of the assaults on our immigration process, estimates are that that will negatively impact and further decrease the number of dollars going into our Social Security program. We can also look at the quality of the jobs that are available to people. If people are employed and fully employed, they are paying into the programs that are allowing people to have their Social Security and their Medicare payments. And so it is a cyclical problem. The workers who are struggling to put food on the table and to survive day to day are also the ones who are, if they were doing better, Social Security would be doing better. And ultimately, to solve the longer-term problem, when we do look at the estimates and what the trust fund is estimated to be at in 16 years from now, it will be at a point where estimates are that we'll be paying out about 70% of what should be the Social Security payments. So we do need to have honest conversations. Members of Congress need to have honest conversations about how it is that they can adjust this shortfall, and whether that is changing the cap, whether that is addressing how it is that they allow for money to flow into the Social Security program. There are a number of conversations that need to be had. But ultimately, we need to recognize that we have put ourselves in this place, that we are allowing people, that we are having a conversation related to Social Security and Medicare where we talk about it as though it's not an incredibly important program that was a promise to workers throughout their career. And there are many ways that we can solve this issue. We've done it before when the trust fund was depleting, and we can do it again, but we need to have the political will in Washington to solve and address the issue.
Thank you, Abigail. All right, next we're going to talk about the environment. All right, so the EPA is a lightning rod in today's political atmosphere. How would you balance the need to protect the environment against the economic impact of regulation? If you want me to repeat that, I will totally repeat that, because that's complicated. I think, wait, who's going first? Abigail first, yeah. You were first, right? Yeah. This shouldn't be confusing. So, do you want me to repeat it again? Okay, yeah. The EPA is a lightning rod in today's political atmosphere. How would you balance the need to protect the environment against the economic impact of regulation?
I would argue that there's a tremendous economic impact by present when we protect the environment. When we look at the effect and the impact of climate change, we talked about agriculture earlier, but I have had conversations with individuals who are no longer able to grow some of the plants, some specialty plants, because of changing environment. When we look at the impact across the state of Virginia of climate change, there are economic imperatives to being able to prioritize addressing environmental challenges and climate change. I think we also need to recognize that when we're discussing the EPA, a lot of the partisan discussions relate to who's at the head of that agency. And we are having conversations because we have someone leading the EPA who doesn't agree with the concept of actually protecting our environment. And first and foremost, that's the most pivotal, important issue that is impacting our ability to solve or address any level of environmental issues. When we look at how it is that we can improve and address problems facing our environment, investing in renewable energy can be very, very good for the economy. It creates jobs, it expands jobs. When we look at the statistics of the job of being a solar panel installer, that is a new job, it's a new industry. So there is a lot of advantages to investing in renewable energy, to building new businesses, building new jobs off of these new industries. And that is the way of the future. So I think part of it is understanding that where we can ensure that the federal government is incentivizing renewable energy, codifying the clean energy standards that were put in place under Obama, and working towards environmental protections, those things can absolutely live together in concert with economic priorities that exist across our state and across our country, and they don't have to be in conflict.
Thank you, Abigail. Dan.
So there's one party in one country that denies climate change is an issue, and that's the Republican Party here in the United States of America. And let's just be honest about it. They deny it because they work for the fossil fuel industry. They know it's real. They do. They're just that type of person to where they're sacrificing the future and even in their own family for a short-term benefit. It is imperative. Climate change, in my mind, there are two fundamental threats to the very existence of our species. One is nuclear war, and the other is climate change. It is the only planet we have, and we need to be caring for it. And we can care for our environment and grow our economy at the same time. Solar industry was growing at 16 times the rate of the rest of the economy, probably until last year. We don't have the statistics on that, but I'm sure it's plummeting now with this administration, and they're kind of doubling down on the fossil fuel industry. I think that the EPA is emblematic of a larger problem here, though. Our institutions are what protect us, folks. It's not individuals. And the EPA is under assault. The Trump administration is putting people in charge of the agencies and the institutions, not to run them, but to tear them down and make them compliant. And that is at the core of what I'm talking about here. It's why we have to stand up and stop what's going on. It's not just the EPA, it's the State Department, it's the judiciary, you name it. They're putting Department of Energy, they're putting people in charge of these agencies that don't know what they're doing. They're in the attempt to bring them down. The VA is another one. There are thousands of unfilled positions in the VA, so the VA fails, so they can privatize it and get back into that loop again. The EPA is part of that. So this is emblematic of a larger problem, and that's why I segued onto that. But we can grow our economy, and we can care for our environment, and we have to, folks. This is our planet. The CO2 levels crossed 410 parts per million, or I think it was parts per million in 2 weeks ago, first time ever. The highest levels in 800,000 years. It's coming home to roost, folks. So we're going to have to contend with it, and we need to win elections so we can start addressing it. We need to get back into the Paris Accord, and we need to start moving to renewable energies as quickly as we possibly can. It is that big of an urgency. But we can't do this until we get into office, because the Republicans are not going to do it, because they don't think like we do. They think about short-term profiteering, even over their own family in a lot of instances. Now, I'm not talking about our friends and neighbors. I'm talking about the folks up in Washington. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. All right, Dan, you're going to take the next question first. So this is about gun violence. In this area, there's a long history of responsible gun ownership. Do you believe that there is a conflict between the Second Amendment and the ability of the government to regulate the types and numbers of weapons in the hands of the average citizen?
And the short answer, yes. But no, seriously, folks, I got a 410 shotgun single barrel when I was 6. I got my hunting license probably when I was 9, maybe 10. I shot on the rifle pistol team when I was stationed in Quantico. I shot expert rifle probably, 15, 20 times, in the Marine Corps, pistol even more. I know what I'm doing with a weapon. But we all recognize that there is a limit inside the Second Amendment. The regulate exists. Where is that line drawn is the question. I think fundamentally that's the question. I mean, you can't go out and buy a tank, right? But you can buy, a semi-automatic assault weapon. I think the line is being drawn incorrectly, and primarily because the NRA is driving and drawing that line, and that institution is being used, even by foreign money, folks, to divide us. As somebody that grew up with weapons in my house my whole life, this issue never really came up. It is a relatively new phenomenon, and it's being done to divide us. But this is one of those right and wrong issues, folks. We have 35,000 people a year in this country that die due to gun violence. Now, granted, 2/3 of those are suicide. In Japan, they have 10. 10. It's the guns, okay? Let's stop kidding ourselves. So this is what I support. Universal background checks, raising the age limit to purchase weapons, assault weapons ban that includes closing the loopholes on it. And if you already own an assault weapon, you got two choices. You can sell it back like they did in Australia, or if you want to keep it, that's great, but you can keep it at the gun range just like we did in the Marine Corps. You check it out of the armory, you shoot, you clean it, and you turn it back in and go home. It's a right and wrong thing, folks, and 60% of Americans agree with that. And it's time for us to start moving in the right direction. We can't continue to move down this path. It is a path of destruction. And so it's going to take a long time because our gun ownership in this country, the rates are right there with Somalia. But we've got to take that first step, and that's what I support. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Abigail.
I absolutely believe that we can address the issue of gun violence in our communities and still respect the Second Amendment. There is a strong opportunity for us to be able to regulate who has a weapon and under what circumstances and still be in line with the Second Amendment and respecting law-abiding gun owners. I'm a former federal agent. I carried a weapon every single day. I grew up in a house with guns. I grew up in a family where my uncle was an avid hunter, and I remember that the most beautiful piece of furniture in his home was his gun case. It was beautiful cherry furniture. And so there doesn't have to be a conflict. The conflict is created when we are unwilling to have the hard conversations about what it is that we expect in our society and what it is that we find unacceptable. And I think it is unacceptable that we have children dying in schools, people dying in movie theaters because someone in a point of crisis or someone chose to use a firearm to kill them. And there are states across this country that have chosen to have stricter regulations than we have here in Virginia, for example, and those have been upheld by a court of law as being wholly constitutional. So to answer your question as to whether or not we can have regulation that both protects people and respects the Second Amendment, the answer is yes, because many states across this country are already doing it. So from a federal perspective, I support putting background checks in place, criminal background checks in place for all firearms purchases. So universal background checks, there's a bill before Congress called the King-Thompson bill. It has bipartisan support. It was proposed by a Republican and a Democrat together, and I support that bill. I also support a bill called the GVRO Act. That is a bill that would provide incentives to states to put in place gun violence restraining orders. When we look at what happened in Parkland, so much of the news reporting was about the fact that people had reported that this young man was a threat. They knew he was a threat, but law enforcement could take no recourse because there was no legal ability for them to do so. States that have gun violence restraining orders in place permit people to come to law enforcement and express their concern that someone might be a threat to themselves or someone else, and then go before a judge and get a restraining order on that person's weapons for the duration of that person's point of crisis. States that have gun violence restraining orders have decreased number of suicides by firearms, decreased numbers of women killed by current or former domestic partners, and decreased numbers of police officers who are shot at and in some cases killed. This is something that we absolutely can do. And I also support, there's another bill before Congress, it's the assault weapons ban of 2018. There are hundreds over 100 members of Congress who are already supporting that. Every Democrat from the state of Virginia has signed on to that legislation, and that would be a great way to address gun violence.
We get it. Thank you. Thank you, Abigail. All right, y'all. So we're going to mix it up a little bit now. Josh, I'm looking at you. Okay, he's going to come up here. So for this question, we're going to have Josh Houston, who not only is, did you say you're VP of Culpeper Youth? Is that correct? So he's VP of Culpeper Youth, but he is also the chair of the Culpeper Young Democrats. So if you are a young Democrat or young at heart or know someone, I guess you can talk to Josh after we're done here. So Josh, thank you very much, and here's your question.
Thank you, Tristan. Okay, so my question is, what do you see as the federal government's primary role in supporting public education? And I don't know whose turn it is. Great.
The federal government has a strong role in setting a standard for what it is that we want to see in our public schools, for driving our longer-term vision of what it is that our public schools can achieve for students across this country. And they have a strong role in providing block grant funding and funding to schools that are significantly underfunded and need additional resources. And when I think of the world that I want to live in, the country that I want to live in, I want every child in this country to have the opportunity to succeed in school, because it is through that child's success that we can have long-term success as a country, that we can address many of the concerns and many of the issues that are facing this country. And I believe that the federal government has a strong role in looking at whether or not it should have a place in providing for early childhood education. I support having early childhood education and federal support to those programs, because study after study shows that when children are put in a classroom and have access to preschool and Head Start programs, they perform better and they do better long term. And when we look at the strength of our educational system, and when we look at the fact that the federal government under bills such as the IDEA Act has pledged to schools across this country to help them meet the needs of children with specific disabilities in their classrooms, but yet through the appropriations process, that bill has not, those obligations have not been met. The federal government has an obligation to meet the obligations it has already set forward and the commitments it has already made to our public schools. When we look at the rates long term, when we invest early in public education, when we invest early in education, study after study shows that we see decreased levels of criminality, we have better health outcomes, and we have higher rates of civic engagement. So as a country, when the federal government makes a commitment to our youngest citizens, we are positively impacting our country as a whole a generation later. And I believe that the federal government, through its committees and processes, has an obligation to look long-term at what opportunities will exist, and what opportunities will exist in the workforce in 5, 10, 15 years from now. And one of the problems that we have with our 2-year election cycle is we're so frequently discussing what is it we did this day, what is it we did tomorrow, instead of having people with a long-term vision of understanding where is it that we're going to be in 10 years, and how is it that we, through incentives and through funding and through prioritization and even through provision of information back to the states and localities, how can we drive it so that schools are providing the best opportunity to students, so that when they are graduating, they are equipped to join the workforce, they are equipped to take their next step, potentially to a 4-year college or a 2-year program, or directly into an apprenticeship program or the military. And we need to have that long-term vision so that we can drive that level of success.
Public education is the cornerstone of what this country has made this country what it is. I feel and I fear that public education is under assault, and it's time for us to stop that. So there are certain things that are too big to fix that the federal government has a role in, and public education at this point in time is one of those issues. I think the federal government needs to have an increased role, because as we know, anywhere from about 92 to 96% of all education funding is local and state. But we have such a disparity in the levels of education in this country. As somebody that lives in Orange County, I can tell you in the rural areas, we can't afford to compete with Fairfax and Henrico County. We just can't do it. And that's where I think the federal government needs to step in. Right now, Title I is only 4% of the education budget in Orange County. It's 8% in Fairfax. That's not right. The rural parts of this country, not just this district, are being left behind in the 21st century economy, and this is where the federal government has a role, and it needs to come in a big way, because if we don't fix our education problems, folks, we are not going to fix the problems of this country, because education is the base and cornerstone of how we're going to go forward as a country and compete, because we still can. But it is going to require a massive effort, and we have to stop giving our money away to Wall Street and the corporate donors. And we need to take that money and start focusing it on the people right here. And it's important, because if we don't, we're going to lose it. They're going to continue to divide us. The vouchers are going to create even further racial divides in this country. The privatization of our education system is going to destroy it. But public education is the cornerstone of it, and it's time to reinforce it and not tear it down. Thank you.
Thank you. Tristan said I could, so I'm going to plug the Culpeper Young Democrats really quick. Follow us on Twitter and on Facebook, and we have an Act Blue page as well if you ever wanted to donate anything, all under Culpeper Young Democrats. Thank you, candidates, and thank you, Tristan. I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, this one time you can clap. Okay, is it out of your system? Okay, good. All right, so Dan, you're going to answer this next question. We're moving on to equality and social justice. So equality and social justice are top of mind for so many Virginians. Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, quality health care, and a living wage are just some of the issues. How should the federal government work to ensure equal treatment and opportunity for all?
You know, I've always had this utopian thought that one of these days we're going to treat people as people, period. And we won't have to legislate equality in this country because we are all just people. Even though the Constitution says that, that's not how it goes, and therefore we have to legislate equality. And I support it wholeheartedly because it is so clearly not equal. And it's time that we start, listen, we need to continue programs that help, that lift the hand up, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's racial, whether it's gender. We need to continue those programs, and we're going to have to legislate equality until we get to the point where we can start looking at each other and we can just start as a person. Particularly right now in this period of time, I feel like we have taken several steps backwards, not just in a racial sense, but also a gender sense. At its core, this is, I believe, a racist and a misogynist administration. And we've got to do something about it. And we need to, this country, we have stumbled forward over our history. We have a checkered past. We can all admit that. But we have stumbled forward. We've moved forward. I feel like we've actually gone backwards here in the last year and a half. And so that's why this is such a critical year. It really is. If we need to take a lever of power away from this destructive administration so we can get in there and protect our institutions and protect the laws that protect the people in an equal basis. And that's why 2018, I say it often, this is a year that will go down in history as one of the most important years in our country's history. And it's important that we understand that. And I think that's what you do, and that's why we're here. I can't imagine that a Democratic forum would have this many people 2 years ago. And so I think this is optimistic, this is emblematic of where we are, and that people are recognizing the seriousness of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Abigail.
We need to look at, there are so many things we can be doing. When it comes to voting, we need to ensure that we are putting back in place an updated version of the Voting Rights Act. When we look at the racial discrimination that has existed in this country and the rollbacks that have occurred after the Voting Rights Act was upended, they are significant. Having someone have power at the polls is one of the most basic things we can do to ensure equality moving forward. And we need to, there's a bill before Congress that would put the Voting Rights Act in an updated form back in place, and we need to do that. When we look at educational disparities that exist, both in our schools and based on socioeconomic background or based on racial background, we need to acknowledge the role of the federal government. There is a Safe Schools Improvement Act that would make it, any schools that are receiving federal funding would have to have non-bullying policies in place, non-bullying based on someone's gender, someone's identity, someone's race. Putting those protections in place for children is incredibly important. I support the Equality Act that would protect members of the LGBT community from harassment, from undue discrimination. I also recognize that we are at a critical point in time where we are seeing that people are no longer willing to accept harassment in the workplace For a long time, well, let me take that back. People have never been willing to accept it, but now we are at a critical point where people are talking about it and people are acknowledging it, and we need to continue to have people be accountable for what is happening across this country. When we're looking at environmental justice, so frequently when we look at areas of pollution, where we look at where there are coal ash ponds with coal ash leaking into the water, where we look at where there are still pipes that are contain lead, those are oftentimes in the lesser socioeconomic areas, and oftentimes in predominantly minority areas. We need to understand and recognize that the federal government has a place in saying that this is no longer appropriate. We need to have changes so that people can grow up healthy and have opportunities. And there is legislation before Congress that would provide and incentivize and require localities to ensure that any unsafe lead plumbing is taken out, so that we will not in the future see a situation where we have poor communities, particularly communities of color, negatively impacted. And frankly, I am also excited because moving into 2018, into the election in November, we also have over 300 women running for Congress across this country. And when we look at the fact that women make up slightly over 50% of the population nationwide, but yet only a little over 19% of Congress, I'm hoping to see a strong, significant shift, because the only way to change the conversation that's happening in Washington is to change the people who are having it. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Dan. Wait, did you go first? Damn it. Oh, I'm just so into the questions that I'm like losing myself. All right. So this next question is kind of a blue sky, kind of like if you won $1 million, kind of, you know what I'm talking about? If you won $1 million, what would you do? It's that kind of a question. So if you could pass any one piece of legislation, like pass it right now, doesn't matter who's the Speaker of the House, if you could just pass one piece of legislation, what would that be? And Abigail, you're supposed to go first.
Choosing just one. I would, if I only could choose one, I would put a universal background check bill in place and just move straight on to the next part of the conversation.
All right. Dan.
I wish I could, magically, give us health care. That's what I would like to do. But what I don't want to have happen is give the Republicans the window like they had in 2010 when we passed the Affordable Care Act and we lost 63 seats in the House of Representatives, thousands of seats across the country, and we're still feeling the effects of that. So, it would be wonderful if we could pass what Bernie Sanders is talking about, but I don't want to do that because I want people to understand what it's like to be on government health care insurance first, so we can't have that blowback on it. So that's my ideal world, but I don't want to do that. That needs to be a lead-in process, so that doesn't work. I'm going to go with gun violence as well. I want to raise the age limit, universal background checks, assault weapons ban, and pulling the weapons off the streets. So that's what if in a magic world. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so Dan, you're going to take this next one. This is sort of to go along with the last one. This is kind of the opposite of the last one. What is your position on working with Republicans in Congress to resolve major issues? Do you have any idea on how this can be accomplished?
Well, I think I was pretty clear in my opening statement. Listen, I believe that what's left of the Republican Party is not the Tuesday group anymore, the Dick Lugers of the world, the Bob Doles of the world. Those folks are gone. What's left of this Republican Party is completely beholden to this administration. And I struggle to think of issues that we can work with them on. Maybe one would be opioid addiction. I think that's probably something that we could probably get done. But as far as immigration reform, they're not going to want to do it because this is how they win elections. As far as doing something significant about health care, they don't want to do it because they're profiteering on it. As far as doing something on gun violence, they don't want to do it because they work for the NRA. I struggle to think of it, of what's left of this Republican Party. There's not much there. There's so much right and wrong going on right now. That's why I'm running at this point. Is like, if you don't see that, you're missing the moment. You're missing what this is standing for. It's time for us to stand up and stop giving them the false equivalencies. Because we as Democrats tend to have this ability to listen and try to compromise and try to, but you're equating to somebody they're not being right. So let's stand up for what's right, because it's that time. I guess so. And to answer your question more specifically, I would hope that we could do something about the opioid epidemic, because it's striking everybody across political spectrums. A contractor was painting the roof of our house last week, and he candidly told me, Dan, I have to pay my workers every single day, because if I don't, they can't buy their pills. If they don't buy their pills, they don't come to work. It's that bad out there, folks. And we have to address it. This is going to be a lifetime problem that we're going to contend with in this country. But I think that's probably something that we could work, across the aisle. But in general, what's left of this party, it's time to stand up and fight them, not reach across the aisle with them. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Abigail. Yeah, I'll repeat it. Yeah. What is your position on working with Republicans in Congress to resolve major issues? Do you have any idea on how this can be accomplished?
So we have arrived at a place where we are so divided, and the divisions that exist in this country, the political gamesmanship and the ideologically driven conversations are destroying the foundation of this country. I'm sure the rest of you had friends and family members, perhaps maybe some of you, who didn't even want to go home for Thanksgiving after the 2016 election, because there's so many people that you just can't even talk to across the table, if it's the aunt, the cousin, the nephew. That is not who we are as a people. That is not any way to move this country forward. I am a lifelong Democrat. I grew up canvassing as a kid. My parents were always the first ones to put their yard signs in the yard and the last ones to take them off about a month after the election, even after we had generally lost. It's true. But I believe that the only way we will have long-term, sustained progress in this country is if we get away from the soundbite jabs at each other and work together to create long-lasting, impactful legislation. And when we look at the popularity, long-term popularity of the Medicare program, it was put in place under a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House of Representatives. They had the votes to put it in place, and yet they got a third of the Republicans to vote for it in the House and in the Senate. And when we look at what a long-term program that has been, the level of popularity that program has been, I believe it is because of the fact that we brought people together and we discussed how it is that we could positively impact our communities through legislation, and they worked together to find a pathway forward. And for me, any level of working together, working across the aisle that we can find, be it on issues, specific issues, or general conversations about what it is that we want to see long-term in this country, have to be conversations that we have. We may not agree, we may disagree wholeheartedly, it may be unproductive, but it is a step that we have to take, because as long as we are moving forward, we are moving forward. And I will never move backwards for the sake of compromise. I will never move backwards for the sake of agreement, but we need to ready ourselves for the hard conversations, because there will be hard conversations. And I'm a former CIA officer. I used to sit across the table from some people and have some really hard conversations where we didn't agree about anything except avoiding a nuclear war between our two countries. And that is fine. Finding the commonality, if it's having your kids get on the school bus and not being fearful that they won't come home, that's one tiny commonality. You work with that. If it's the idea that you don't want your mother to pay too much for her Medicare prescription drugs, that's your one commonality. You work with that. If it's you're a Republican from a rural area in the South or the Midwest and you want to have broadband internet, you work with that and move forward.
Thank you, Abigail. All right, so we're only going to do maybe 2 or 3 more questions, I think, if we can fit in. We're supposed to end in about 10 minutes, but I'll play it by ear. So the 7th is one of the most exciting races in the country, I think. It's one of the most doable flips that exists in Virginia. But taking on Dave Brat is going to take a lot of money. So the question is, what are going to be your main sources of funding for your campaign moving forward? And you can take from that, are you going to accept money from PACs, that kind of stuff? Does that make sense? So Abigail, you're going to go first.
So building out a campaign that's going to be strong enough to beat an entrenched incumbent who is popular with right-wing ideologues will be very difficult. And we have, from day one, focused on ensuring that, first and foremost, people believe it's winnable, because we are going to need a ton of people to invest their time and energy into this race. So we've built a campaign focused in the 7th District, and part of that's by necessity, because when I started this campaign, I'm a former CIA officer, I worked undercover, I couldn't rely on my former colleagues who legally can have no linked affiliation with me these days. And so I sat around the table with a bunch of friends and said, how are we going to do this? And we built the campaign slowly, bit by bit, within the 7th District. We currently have over 1,600 donors within the 7th District who are committed to creating that change. We have over 1,100 volunteers on the ground who are committed to making that change, knocking doors, phone banking, volunteering. And when we look at the continued process of fundraising to build out this campaign, our campaign has leaned a lot on our neighbors in the 4th District within Richmond City. We've got a tremendous level of excitement there, and we have done very well in fundraising locally in the 4th District as well. And we've expanded nationally. When we talk about the fact that this race has become such an interesting race on the national stage, a lot of that is driven by some of the press that we've been able to get for our campaign. I was featured in the Washington Post when they did an article about former CIA officers running for Congress. There's me, there's a woman in Michigan, and a man in New York. I was one of the women featured on the cover of Time magazine in January, and they listed our race as one of the 10 races to watch in 2018. So there is excitement, and we have had a lot of good opportunities to fundraise from people who are strong Democrats across this country, who have a history of supporting candidates in winnable races, and we've been relying on them as well. We will continue to do so. I am not taking money from corporate PACs. That's a decision that our campaign has made. But we have also garnered the support of various different ideological PACs, such as Emily's List, End Citizens United, which is an organization committed to campaign finance reform. I believe very deeply that the significant problems we are having across the political spectrum link back to where the dollars are coming from, who they are influencing, and the fact that the people do not feel like they have as much of a voice anymore because there are such a strength of influences coming from money. I've been endorsed by NARAL, Population Connection, Women Under 40 PAC, and they have all been supportive of our campaign. We continue to apply for additional endorsements. I've also received the support of SMART, which is a union of sheet metal workers and train transportation workers. And so we are continuing to build up our network of support by people who want to see change in the 7th District, recognize that we will be able to effect positive change. But first and foremost, our base of support has begun strongly and most fundamentally within the 7th District among voters and the people who have to believe in that change.
Thank you, Abigail. Dan.
So before I go into answering that question, I want to take a moment to address an attack that came. There was an attack made on our campaign suggesting that we took dark money. That's not true. Both of our candidates, both of our campaigns take money from outside groups. Both of them. The insinuation was that With Honor takes money is dark money. That's not the case. With Honor is a veterans organization that is transparent of where they get their funding from. So with that note, I too am excited about moving forward because it's going to be the first time in the history of this district that we're going to be able to go toe-to-toe and dollar for dollar with the Republicans. Our support is largely coming from unions and from people right in here in the district. I've got support from AFL-CIO. I got their endorsement. I've got With Honor and their endorsement. I got Vote Vets and their endorsement. I've got IBEW and their endorsement, CWA and their endorsement. I'm a union person, and I'm proud of that because I think that there is a role for collective bargaining in this future because we need more people to stand up and push back against what's happening in this country in the middle class and the working people of this country. So we're going to be able to raise money. We're going to be able to go against Dave Brat. That is one of the benefits of having a national person who does not ever miss a microphone. He is well known across the country for sticking his foot in his mouth. And so we're going to be able to do this. And on the back to the here again, listen, we made a pledge that we're going to continue to run a positive campaign. It's transparent and positive, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to use part of the next answer to, that's fine. These were the rules we agreed upon before, so I don't want to. I have done that before, but I just want to. We got to stick to the rules. Otherwise, what's going on? Okay, so we're going to do 2 more questions, and none of this is counted against your time, obviously. All right, so Dan, is Dan going first? Okay. All right, Dan, so we're going to do 2 more questions. This one is about immigration. Immigration has been a hot topic in Culpeper. 287G and the repeal of DACA are symptomatic of a failed system. What does comprehensive immigration reform look like to you?
So the DACA kids, right? It is shameful what we're doing to them. This is the best and brightest of our immigrant community, kids that are going to college. And the United States government made a deal with these kids. And let's be honest about this. They've been here most of their lives. This is home. And we made a deal with them, and our word should be good. And for us to be playing politics with those kids is shameful, and we need to stop it right away. And that's what's happening right now. They are a leverage, they are a bargaining chip in politics, and we need to not do that. As far as our immigration system, it is wholly dysfunctional. And I think it's dysfunctional on purpose. Because let's not forget how Dave Brat won his seat in 2014, running on an immigration issue against Eric Cantor. They don't want to fix the immigration system because this enables their elections. We have to continue to think like how they think. This is why they don't want to fix it. I think we are a sophisticated country. We know what we want in this country as far as legal immigration as a pathway to citizenship. We know what we want in this country as far as guest worker visas. And we need to fix it. We need to assign those numbers in our immigration system so that the people in wherever country that wants to immigrate to or from can go to the consulate or they can go to the embassy and apply for that pathway. That's what we need to be doing. But it's folks, I go back to winning elections. We're gonna have to win in order to get these things done. Because at its core, we as Democrats are the ones that understand that government has a role in functioning society. We're not completely innocent, but we try to get things done for the betterment of society, and we don't play politics as badly as they do. And I just fear that the Republicans are never going to fix our immigration system, and therefore it's going to be incumbent on us to win elections to then fix it. But we need to do this humanely, because as it is now, the immigrants in this country are they're in the shadows and have no recourse when something goes wrong. And so they're being taken advantage of because of that. That is not good for anybody. And so the entirety of our immigration problem needs to come out of the shadows and needs to be done legally. And we can do that by fixing our immigration system with real information. Because this is a country of immigrants, and we need to continue to be a compassionate country. But first and foremost is the DACA, though. We have to stop that. That is shameful what we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Abigail, and if you want to address what Dan said before, that's totally fine.
Yes, I would. So our campaign did not attack Dan. We simply noted the fact that there was an outside organization that was spending money in our district for a push-pull against our campaign. And when you look at the funding source of that organization, they have received corporate funding, and Chief, $100,000 from a corporate PAC that's fully owned by the youngest Koch brother. So when we look at funding that's coming into our district, I always knew that Koch brother money would flow into the 7th district. I didn't think it would happen in the primary. And so while it is an organization that supports veterans and honestly, Dan has no control over whether or not they do an independent expenditure. That's the important thing. This organization came in, they have spent money in our district. He has no control over it, so it was not an attack on you. It's the fact that there is outside money coming in, attempting to influence what it is that the voters of the 7th district do. And that I find offensive. As someone committed to campaign finance reform, the fact that an outside organization would come in and try and undermine one campaign to the detriment of, in our case, our campaign, is problematic. So yes, I did comment on the fact that there is outside money from an organization that just spent over $400,000 funding a Republican in a Republican runoff who calls on his website Democrats leftists. I think it's problematic, and we noted that, but it wasn't an attack against you because you had no control over it. Regarding the immigrant-related question, we need comprehensive immigration reform. When we look at this issue, it is a humanitarian issue. It is also an economic issue. When we have a president who is just of his own decisions taking TPS protections away from vital workers and individuals who have found refuge in this country and who are legally working and adding to our economy, it is so incredibly important that we stop, that we have a Congress who can stand up to the president and ensure that we are protecting people who cannot return home to their country. We also need to ensure that people who are here under the DACA program, that we continue to ensure that the promises that were made to young students, in fact, are realized, and we give kids who have only ever known the United States as their country a pathway to citizenship as they were previously promised, because it is a humanitarian issue, it's an economic issue, it is an issue of how our communities are built and who exists here right in our communities. And we need to recognize and stand up for the fact that our country was built as a nation of immigrants, and our country has prospered as a nation of immigrants. And we need to continue to support a healthy immigration system that allows for family reunification, that allows for immigrants to continue coming here and filling jobs across the spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. All right, so we're on the last question. I hope it's easy. I asked this question at a forum last week, and it was not easy, and I can tell you that was not good. Okay, so our final question is, on June 13th, one of you will no longer be a candidate for the 7th Congressional District. Much like Tom Perriello did for Governor Northam, will you actively support and campaign to help the winner beat Dave Brat in the general election? You're first.
Yes. Yes is my answer, and I will do what I have always done, which is work to get Democrats elected. I canvassed as a kid. I grew up canvassing, engaged in politics. I had a stint when I was barred by the Hatch Act from being but so political, and as soon as I was free from the Hatch Act, I was out canvassing, phone banking, participating in the political process, and advocating for the election of Democrats at every step of government. Right in Henrico County, for our Board of Supervisors, we flipped a seat. For the House of Delegates members, across where I live, because it's a confluence of gerrymandered districts, I worked, I phone banked, I canvassed, I spent the summer outside. It was our family activity. My kids hold the paperwork, we walk. That's what I will continue doing, because it is so incredibly important for the future of our country that we make a change in the representation that we have in Virginia's 7th District, and that we ensure that Tim Kaine also gets reelected. And it's not just about 2018, it's about 2019, because every House of Delegates member I worked so hard to ensure, as one single person passing out papers, I want to make sure those people keep their seats, and that requires that we continue having people engaged in the 2018 elections. Where I live in Henrico County, we can flip our Senate seat, and one flip of a seat means the difference. As a Virginian, that is incredibly important to me. And so 2018, while it's an important election, clearly because I'm running for a seat, it is part of a longer-term strategy of ensuring that across the state of Virginia, our Commonwealth has better representation, in addition to setting up a standard where Democrats across the state understand that there is an election every single year, and the fun doesn't stop, and we have to keep out and keep getting there. So yes, 100% I will be campaigning on June 13th, no matter who the nominee is, because it's what I've done in the past, and it's what I believe in. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Dan.
Well, I don't know. Most of you know that we worked really hard to get this primary. This was on its way to being a caucus. Was going to take the vote away, and so our campaign is we've put our money where our mouth is by fighting for the right to vote, and I've done that, and I will continue to do that. I've said this 100 times. On day one, I was asked that question. Yes, I will support the winner of the primary, and I will be working as hard as I can. I've used the Tom Perriello example countless times. I was at a fundraiser for Ralph that Tom introduced Ralph at. This was shortly after their primary, and I'm telling you, it was one of the most rousing speeches I've ever heard in my life that Tom gave, and I was like, holy cow. Like, that guy, understands. And then about 4 months later, I was doing a fundraiser for Ben Hickson at my house. Tom shows up after 7 events that day he had done for Ralph. So that guy has showed us the way forward, and we're going to work tirelessly to elect Democrats, because I think I've made it pretty clear how important this is this year. We need to win, folks. We really do. And so it's not, we're going to need help. Like, listen, let's be real here. Ralph lost this district by 3.5 points in November. So we're going to have to start working harder. I know we're working hard, but we're going to have to start working harder. And I think what we're going to have to do, folks, is what we've been doing as a campaign. We've spent a lot of time, and I think y'all have seen us out there, but we're going to have to organize the rural areas like Chesterfield and Henrico have been organized. And I think that that's the difference. That's where we're going to get it. Because I believe that Chesterfield and Henrico are going to show up like they've been showing up. It's time for us to stand up, and it's time for us to be proud of being Democrats. We are on the right side of history. And let's put our signs up. Let's wear our buttons. Let's talk to our friends and neighbors, because our friends and neighbors that are Republican are quite different than the Republican Party in Washington, D.C. Those are the folks that we need to talk to them about health care, talk to them about education, talk to them about infrastructure, because they're facing the same issues that we are. And they're different than what's left up there. I mean, when Paul Ryan's quitting, that should tell you something. All right? That should tell you something. And that's where we're at. And so listen, yes, June 13th is day one. But listen, let's not forget the real election's in November. Thank you.
All right, so now we're at the time when we're going to give y'all an opportunity to give closing remarks. I think since we've been doing the switching back and forth, I think we're going to start with Dan and end with Abigail. So you have 4 minutes to say whatever you want. I don't care what you say. It's your thing. So say what you want for 4 minutes.
Well, I would like to start off with welcoming my daughter home. That's Elizabeth. She just got back from college. She finished her first year at NYU. We're really happy to have her back. We miss having our kids around. So my son, I think he's flown the coop. But we're glad to have Elizabeth back. And I'm glad that you guys all came out here today. It's really wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Each time I come back to Culpeper, the crowd is bigger. And that's very encouraging. And let's continue this momentum. Let's continue this forward. Because, folks, it is a pivotal year. I think we Democrats understand that there is a role for government in our lives. Whether it's a social safety net that so many of us at some point in our life have relied upon, or whether it's protecting our healthcare system or building into and fixing our healthcare system rather than tearing it down so you can profiteer on it. Whether it's fixing our education system, because it's education that is the bedrock of how we're going to move forward as a society. We need to start focusing on those issues. And I want to talk about the VA too. As a veteran, it is vitally important, folks. As the drumbeats of war are beating around the world right now, because they are, let's not forget, instead of Roosevelt, we have Trump. Okay? So we need Congress to start doing their job. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, but they have abdicated that responsibility because they're too worried about an election. They're more worried about being reelected than doing their job. And I promise you, that is not me. I'm doing this for the right reasons. I promise you, I will go to Washington. I will vote those hard votes. I will come back and I will explain to you why I voted those hard votes. And if you don't like it, send me packet and I am A-okay with that. But that's the attitude we need. We need people who will not sacrifice their character because of the position. And I won't do that, folks. I won't do it. I'm doing this for the right reasons, and there's so much right and wrong going on right now, and it is time to stand up, and it is time to fight for right, because we are on the right side of history. And I look forward to earning your vote. My name is Dan Ward. June 12th is the primary. Thank you, and please come up and talk to us if you have any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Abigail.
As a CIA officer, when I worked undercover, my goal most of the time was to be the least interesting person in the room so that people wouldn't ask me questions about my job. I would talk about the weather at parties and talk about kids and those sorts of things. I I was driven to do my job not because it was interesting or exciting from the perspective of everyone else, but because I knew the value of what it is that I was doing. I talked about the weather because that allowed me to sit across the table from someone and collect that vital information that could thwart a terrorist attack. And it was exciting, and I was passionate about it, and I believed deeply in what I was doing. But there was no glory in it, and I was totally fine with that. I am a workhorse, and I love policy, and sometimes I'm told I get too far in the weeds, and I don't care, because that's where you make strong decisions. And I am running for this seat because this is the community that I grew up in, and I believe deeply that we can right this ship, that we need people who are driven to understand the complicated challenges facing our country and who are driven to look and find the complicated solutions. And finding those solutions require really hard conversations. And that's the hard work that I am willing to put in, that I want to put in, that I am requesting and asking that you trust that I will put in, because it is what I believe we can do and achieve as a country. When we have new people participating in the conversation in Washington, we can fundamentally change the conversation and put this country back on the right path. And we have built an incredible machine of a campaign. We've got over 1,100 volunteers. We've been door knocking since January. Our team's in 5 different counties. I'm frankly not sure. I'll have to check with my campaign manager today, because we are present everywhere, building up the network of people and the momentum and the foundation of a campaign that it will take in order to beat our incumbent. And we have been building that motivation, that excitement in the 7th District since the beginning, and we have been so fortunate to be able to build our campaign also on the foundation built by the brave and excited and dedicated people who put their names on the ballot last year, 3 of whom won within the 7th District, and a number of others who came very close or made an incredible, incredible change just to the conversation by allowing people to see that there are Democrats around them, there are people in their neighborhoods, there are people who want the same things, and getting those people excited for the possibility of change in Richmond and now in Washington. And I am running because I really, truly am motivated to see change in this country. I believe it is possible, and I am excited for what November will bring, and even more excited for what January 2019 will look like. I thank you very much for participating, for being here, for being a part of the process. When we look at the groups of people we've done, I don't even know, 13 of these events or more so far, the rooms are always packed. Our campaign alone has now done 95 meet and greets. We had 75 people in a room in Chesterfield last night. There is incredible momentum across this district, and it's because people like you are engaged and excited and motivated to see the change that we all know is possible, to see the change that we want to see, and to work on righting this ship, because every day out of Washington, it is a new threat against us. It is a new threat against some part of who we are as a foundational country, be it education, be it healthcare, be it the rights of our fellow citizens, and we need people who are going to stand up and make changes and work to ensure that we put this country back on the path we all want it to be on. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Okay, everybody can clap now. If y'all want to stand up, that's fine with me. I don't care. I'm not going to yell at you. That's good. Okay, everybody sit down. Just before you guys, I'm going to bring up Jamie, and she's going to close this out, so if you want to stay up here, that's totally fine. Before I get off the stage, I just want to say really quickly that I have, this is the 3rd forum that I've done for congressional candidates. I did one in the 5th, I did one in the 6th, and now I did one in the 7th. I might be biased because I live in the 7th. These guys were the best, I'm just saying. So just really quick before I get off, bring Jamie up, I want to tell you that we have filmed this entire forum, and we're going to be posting a video of it on the Culpeper Democrats Facebook page. So we encourage you to go onto the Facebook page, follow us, and take this video and share it as much as you can, because it's great to have such a great turnout, but I know that all of you know at least one person, right? Y'all know at least one person? Take that video, share it with that one person, and get them to come out on June 12th to vote for one of these amazing candidates. Also, Jamie might say this, but we have a table in the back where you can sign up to volunteer for the polls on June 12th. The Culpeper Democrats are going to be working. I want to work all the polls. It's a lot of polls. It's like 15 polls. So we need as many volunteers as we can get. All right, now Jamie Clancy is going to come back up.